into it this morning. CT, we can't run away from you telling us can get this mortgage and how we can do it in the best way possible. Go.
Well, let's start with you wanting to own a house or to buy a house. Let's start there. Let's also then move on to whether you are employed, whether you are self-employed, or whether you're in the diaspora. Let's talk about you wanting to actually have details as to what it is a mortgage entails. So let me tell you about DTB Bank, because they have a mortgage plan that can suit your needs. And how do I know this? Well, if you have a conversation with them, either by sending an email at mortgages@dtbafrica.com or visiting any DTB branch, the conversation you will have will be as follows. The mortgage that are on offer go for 9% interest for a period of 10 years. If you wish to have a mortgage for 25 years, you need to be young to have this one here. You can't ask for a mortgage of 25 years at my age. It simply won't work. You will be asked to pay an interest of 9.75. Now, DTB says, now pause and listen to the cream that we are going to add on top of this particular cake. The interest rate that you charge is a constant. It will not change. It will not bounce. It will not move. It is not elastic. It will stay. 1, 2. There are no hidden charges. That's number 2. 3, there are no penalties if you pay ahead of the schedule of payment that you've been given. Now, having said all this, I would advise that you either visit a Diamond Trust branch or you email them at mortgages@dtbafrica.com, just so that you can find out the details for yourself. Yes, and confirm.
It's great.
Yes.
It's great. All right, we're getting into a conversation how then you share information and how you share that information in a space whereby political propaganda, political messages are also coming out at the same time. No better than a person and have this conversation with than veteran journalist Macharia Gaitho, and he's here with us this morning. Macharia, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Everybody, I'm good.
Karibu sana.
As always.
You're always good.
Oh, yes.
You need to sprinkle this positivity on everybody else. This optimism is great. You know, good to have you here today.
My pleasure.
Asante sana. So, I mean, a lot of sticky conversations to have, but necessary to do so in terms, especially in the moment in which we are in. But before we get into that, CT, as you know, your good friend goes to the continents of Africa every week. And he tells us where we are this week, and he'll share the proverb, and I'm very interested to hear what your interpretation of that would be.
Yes, this week we are in the land of honest people, Burkina Faso. Yes, whose capital, as we were told very, very clearly by Anki, is Woo.
Oh, yes, yes.
Oh, Lord.
Woo, 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 woo.
Ouagadougou.
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 Ouagadougou. Ouagadougou.
D-O-U.
Ouagadougou.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ouagadougou.
Yeah.
Yes, this is the country that had at one time the privilege of having someone as Thomas Sankara as its president. A man who had the courage to take steps to actually bringing about real change. And in African setting, when we talk about real change, some of the changes he brought about, this one I find monumental. Not only did he get over 2 million children vaccinated and made equal education for everybody, he banned gender-based violence, but now wait for it, he banned polygamy. I would wonder, how did that one work in an African setting? And one which is predominantly Islamic in their faith. How did he manage to work with that one? But anyway, that was then. Now a leader called Ibrahim Traore. The proverb. The horse cared for by 2 grooms dies of hunger. The horse cared for by 2 grooms dies of hunger.
That's an interesting one. I would think that when you have 2 people charged with the same task, none of them takes responsibility.
True. Yes, indeed.
2 people, same task, no responsibility.
Yes,
No accountability as well.
Management by committee.
Indeed, and haven't we seen that many times? I'm sure we can point to many instances where we see that taking place. Good note to jump off on this morning. Macharia, I mean, we've had these conversations with you, and I think necessary to keep having them when we talk about, the messages that are being put out to the public, and how we're able to strike a balance between that information and that Kenyans need, and at the same time where there's a lot of political messaging coming out at the same time. How do you say, okay, this is the idea that somebody wants me to spread, but at the same time, this is what Kenyans need to know? There are many examples today. The big one that's flashing at everybody today, SHA is perfect and it's working, but Kenyans are saying, okay, so what do we really need to know? How do we start to create the balance between what a political sentiment would be and the information that Kenyans need to keep them informed?
I think, speaking as an editor or a former editor, once an editor, always an editor. Therefore, the first thing, please advise your people, the ones who are running those scrolls on the screen, how to spell the word impartial. Now, Kenya is
First point of order.
Kenya is a political, very much a political country. And there is almost a demand and a hunger for politics. When I was in the newsroom, we used to conduct various surveys. And sometimes you want to shift away from the regular political headlines. And nobody buys the paper. You come up with beautiful stories, human interest stories, economic stories, family stories, health stories, but nothing beats some splash featuring the president and the opposition chief and people fighting. But at the same time, there is so much else that needs to be told.
Yeah.
But we need to find how to tell it in a way that is interesting and that people will resonate with. Today, health is a big issue.
It is.
But it is also so political because the universal public health is being pushed as a political project rather than a social project. Same thing with housing. There's nothing wrong with availability and helping people to acquire houses. But when it is pushed as a political project, then questions will be asked because there is always that tendency to take shortcuts. We are seeing with the health thing, I mean, it's just crazy, the kind of contracts somebody in government is signing, where you find that the only beneficiaries are not the people in need of healthcare, but the vendors of various products and the people who are giving out the procurement. Same with housing. You never hear about tenders for the people who are supplying cement, steel, sand, roofing tiles. These things are done under the table. So when we're told Kenyans are benefiting, yes, very few Kenyans are benefiting. The ones who are supplying those commodities. Let us discuss them. But also let us really take a look and step aside from the politics. Do we need universal health care? Yes. Do we need affordable housing? Yes. Is the government necessarily the right agent to drive those projects? I don't think so, because the government is very, very poor when it comes to management. They can't even run a kiosk, leave alone a major parastatal. So let us look at what can we do about making sure that things can actually work for the benefit of Kenyans. And also, how do we address the real issues of Kenyans? It's like we have been poisoned by politicians. that all we think is that the politicians are the solution to our problems. They are not. They do not offer any solutions. What they do is get in the way. I'd like to think of a situation. What if there was no government? And everybody was told, sort out your issues.
Find your way.
Find your way. I'm telling you, Kenyans are very resourceful people. They will do wonderful things. Government is an impediment. Politics becomes an impediment. As simple as that.
Do you think that today Kenyans, Macharia, are living in spite or operating in spite of government, which is essentially tasked to make sure that a conducive environment has been met for survival, 1, 2, 3, whether it's education, health, business, etc. That's why government is there. But are Kenyans operating in spite of? We see this system that's not working. Kenyans are still finding a way to somehow get treated. School, this, that. Kenyans are still finding a way to send their children to school.
100%. I think we're surviving, yes, in spite of government. I think the best thing the government should be able to do is to simply set the basic foundations, create the enabling environment, and then step out of the way and let things work without those interfering hands. But today we have a government which is, first of all, bloated. Yes, we have constitutional limits now on the number of cabinet secretaries. But look at the quality of those appointed. The CS for Health cannot explain her project. Neither can the PS, Universal Health. The CS for Housing, or whatever they call it, cannot explain that affordable housing project. Up to today, we are getting contradictory information on some of those funds. We don't know whether they are levies, whether they are taxes, whether they are contributions. The people who are supposed to explain cannot. So what purpose are they serving? What if we simply said the private sector can provide the housing? The government enables by providing the land and tax rebates on purchase of or importation of whatever materials are required.
Yeah.
Today we have a glut of housing in what you might call upper class housing.
Yes.
Go to Kilimani, Kileleshwa, Lavington, Westlands, hundreds of apartment blocks, high rise,
Condos.
which are 3/4 empty.
Yeah.
There is a problem. So why were we focusing on building upper class housing and neglecting what you might call affordable housing? We must find a way of doing it. If we left to the private sector, I am sure the private sector can provide.
Now, you've mentioned something about contradictory kind of information given left, right, and center. And over again, you have heard the government acknowledge that there's some bit of a problem in communication. Now, what's the role of not just information, but in-depth communication properly done in relation to governance?
The problem with this government, it does not know the difference between communication and propaganda. This government has more communications people than all previous governments put together.
At different levels.
Everybody is a director of communication somewhere or other. Assistant director, secretary of communications. But what do? They have no idea what they're supposed to be communicating. Our communication is about employing 100 guys to go on Twitter to spread propaganda and to jump up and sing songs of praise, or to hammer whoever is not singing the right song. That is what our communication system is. Government communications is about. Has been reduced to.
But and in your opinion, Macharia, what should it be like? What should government communication be about?
I think simply it is about having in place the people who can give the public the information the government needs to communicate. And it does not always have to be reactive, that you only communicate when you want to answer somebody back. It does not have to be releasing stories and videos of your achievements. Your achievements, if they are there, will speak for themselves, because they do a lot on saying how much they have done. If it was so great, they would not even have to say it. It would be seen.
So
there is actually no government communications manual, or at least one which works. I remember a long time ago, when the Uhuru regime came to power, or we used to call it the Uhuru regime.
Yes.
A PS at the time in the Ministry of Information was trying to finalize a government communications strategy. A few of us were invited to give our input. There was already a document, a working document. In the middle of a meeting in the board house at the Ministry of Information, some two fellows walked in from State House. The fellows who blog and do such things. They said they've come from State House.
Okay. All right.
The story ended there. They said the only person who communicates for government is the president. So we said, then what are we doing here? So they want to centralize communications at State House. But State House is not necessarily the only source of information.
State House is not the seat of government.
Every ministry has a director of communications.
Right.
But let me tell you, those fellows are just glorified briefcase carriers. As an editor, I know that I call one of those fellows to give me some information. He will not be able to
give.
The best he'll do is let me consult the PS.
Is he refusing to give it to you, or he doesn't have it?
He is not empowered to give you that information.
Okay.
So, what's the point?
And yet, what ought to be the reality is that this is the individual whom you would actually need to call if you wanted to understand something about that ministry.
Yes, I do not have to call the minister or the PS or some other director of this and that. The communications fellows are the ones that should be able to reach very easily.
And do you think, Macharia, that if you were to call and somebody was to give you the information, it would be a confirmation of what you can already see? Here we are saying that, look, we've seen Shah in the headlines for the last, I don't know how many weeks. We've looked at the floor of the House in the deliberations by committee members, and that's all they're talking about. We've seen people in funerals and church services over the last 2 weeks. Again, this is all they're talking about. The president has been saying, yeah, it's working. If something was working, you wouldn't have to shout that it was working. If people were going to hospital getting treated in the manner in which you said that it was to be, we would know. We would not hear the rumblings that we do. Even if there was propaganda set out to say that Shah is not working, eventually the truth would float to the top. We would see it. And the same vein, if I were to call it Director of Communications to give me information on what I see is working, it would be to confirm what I already see. But if I have to look for it, then there's an issue here. So how do we then now say these are not the things that we should be highlighting, or these are the things that we should be highlighting in the face of what is very glaringly obvious or evident?
These are such topical issues. There are issues which go to the heart of everybody's needs in Kenya. Healthcare. It touches everybody.
Yeah.
How can you not discuss it? But part of the biggest problem is that the fellows in government are in denial. They're insisting that this sometimes I forget what to call it, is working. You're right. If it was working, then why would there be all these issues coming up? Even within government, people are questioning. But these fellows prefer to bury their heads in the sand and just tell the lie that it is working. And if you are asking questions, you must be opposition, or you must be a saboteur, or you must be Murema. They have to look for some nonsensical scapegoat.
There are those who study the processes, the rises and the falls of empires. And in studying them, they explain in detail how it is. They're mostly historians, how it is that empire rose. But while talking of the decline, they always try to explain to you and tell you when this happened. That's when the decline began. But at that point in time, it wasn't visible. It becomes visible much, much later. Now, if certain fundamental tenets that fall under the broad category of responsibilities that a government must have for its people, if those fundamentals are questioned, then there should be a response that gives an explanation. It doesn't have to be plausible, but it has to be an explanation. An explanation in which, when you interrogate, you can determine, yes, there's some truth here. Or there isn't if you don't want to. But there must be. Now, if you have a situation where that isn't the case, and it isn't just with health, it is a discussion that is had with education. Every time you have a new term, you're talking about education. And when you talk about health, there's one really sticky point that has never been resolved, the Shakahola issue. We've actually forgotten about it because there's so much happening. We've forgotten. Where did that matter get to? This was a case where so many things were involved. You're talking about lives lost. You're talking about the social ramifications. You're talking about the health. Now,
security.
The list goes on. There are people who should respond. At that particular point in time, the person who was appointed was now is now our deputy president. How exactly does one in government expect the citizenry to have faith in that particular government or to trust it when things as monumental as that remain unresolved and you do not hear anybody talking about it anymore? It's like it's done. How?
You're looking at me or looking at her?
That's you, Macharia.
We're all looking at you.
You're looking at me.
No. I am actually looking at you, but
Yeah.
I am. I'm looking at you because I was thinking.
Yeah.
Even if you were to offer an explanation, you have to ask. First of all, how did such a thing happen? You have security forces, you have security agents, you have a system within this government that's supposed to ensure that the lives of people are protected. How did that happen? Then you bring it to what happened recently at Kware. Now, for me, that was mind-boggling. Completely. Bodies, not one, not two, not three, not four.
329.
Then what follows after that is you're told the person who was arrested.
Escaped from jail.
Not
from jail, from police station.
Police station. You sort of like think, okay.
You're trying to wrap your head.
No, it is bizarre. It is bizarre because you have to ask, are we saying that the people in charge of security don't have a handle on this particular docket? And yet you find that is not actually true. Because there are very many instances where we have it on record that these very same security people have acted expeditiously and issues have been resolved. Now, when there's so much that even appears to be contradictory, you are at a loss because you start wondering now, okay, so where exactly are we? Remember I started off by talking about empires. Well, let's talk about governments because a government is a sort of an empire. So you have to ask, so what are we saying? Or more importantly, what are we seeing? And the citizenry have reason to doubt. More importantly, the citizenry have reason to ask questions.
Right.
Yes.
You know, I think governance is not something for the president, that he is the alpha and the omega and everybody must kneel and bow before him. It is about appointing the right people across the board, starting with the cabinet, the PSs, the county commissioners, the police chiefs, and all those government administrators, and get them to do their work. They have to be competent in the first place. But if you are going to make strategic positions in government the home for political reward, for giving jobs to your cronies, to your MPs who have failed to win re-election, and so on and so forth, things will not work because those are not the right people. I think we used to have a very professional public service at one time.
For the very longest time.
And it did not matter who is in State House. The systems
The systems worked.
worked.
Yes. And
The
you knew it,
systems
and you
worked.
knew they worked.
But today, State House become the point of reference for everybody, that most ministers cannot pronounce themselves on their own dockets.
Why? Why would you have a government which has 22, 23 individuals who are supposed to sit at positions? Why would you then be involved to the level of even, explaining what happens? This whole Shah debacle, for example, should be explained by the cabinet secretary. Falls right at her doorstep.
But you have seen
when we
her-
talk about info. No,
But you have seen when she tries to explain.
we could get very painful tantrums to listen to some of that. We have a minister for roads infrastructure should be dealing with telling us about what's going on. We have in some part a CS for education who every now and then tells us a little bit about something that's going on in the school system. But we have the president explaining away some of these things. Now, when we talk about the problems in which we find ourselves today, Macharia, and how we should be sharing this information, we have people who are telling us that things are very okay and that things are hunky-dory, but then when you double click and you start to chip away at them, you see then it's very possible that a lot of this is propaganda and that things are actually not working. And isn't that a scary place to be?
And the citizens are feeling the pain, and they are reacting, and they are complaining, and they are crying for help. But if we then keep on saying, that things are working, and everybody can say they are not working, there is a problem, and that maybe is a governance problem. And we are so busy trying to cobble together political alliances. If you bring Raila into government, everything is solved. All we need is to get this ethnic bloc and this ethnic bloc, reward this tribal chief.
And we've done that before.
And that is our focus. But not on making things work.
No.
We're thinking towards the next elections, and not ethnic kingpins will be in our corner.
Actually,
and that is not just for the president. Even the opposition. That is their only focus. Gachagua, Kalonzo, all those things are their only focus is on which ethnic blocks they can bring together, not what they can do to actually make things work.
Macharia, you've gotten to the heart of the matter, because when you listen to conversations, I was asking myself this question on the weekend. Why is it that these individuals who present themselves as the opposition, why are we not hearing how they would do things differently? Why are we not hearing that, look, folks, we have this problem. Why don't we take this path? You don't hear it. We have this issue. Why don't we do this? What they tell us, what we already know. Or this thing has a problem. We know there is a problem. We don't need someone to tell us. We already know. Okay, if we have an issue, say for instance, with the county governments and the issues to do with the funding of county governments, that problem is usually in the public domain, we know. So I've not heard of anyone coming up and saying, folks, this problem that we keep talking about, perhaps the path we ought to follow is this one here. Can we consider this? It doesn't come out.
Yeah.
And then the dominant conversation, I personally find this one tiresome. Okay, Ruto must go. And then, okay, he's gone. And then,
And speaking of which, there's also has been a conversation of, you've talked about the opposition. And if you really want to communicate solutions and get to an understanding as a nation, give alternatives. Communicate exactly what you think should be done and how it should be done. The shadow cabinets, etc.
Yes.
If that way, then essentially would say that there is some path that we are actually moving in a certain direction as a country. You give an alternative to what ought to be done. Isn't that how we should keep the government in check?
We have a finance bill.
Yes.
We should be getting from the opposition an alternative finance bill. Or an alternative, when you come to the budget in June, we should be getting from the opposition an alternative budget. But we don't have, because, one big problem is that all these guys are from the same school. I don't think it was Moyo Kamoto who told us that Kanu will rule for 100 years.
I think they knew what they were talking about.
They knew what they were talking about. It is still Kanu ruling. Jubilee is children of Kanu.
Yes.
Gachagua and Kalonzo and
These are
Kioni and all those characters.
Same line.
Same thing. There's no difference. They will not come with different solutions. Now, I think what made Kenyans very excited last June and really captured the imagination of everybody is that we had the Gen Zs coming up who are not tainted by those KANU baggage and KANU associations and KANU mindset. Unfortunately, it fizzled out. And I don't know that something is going to rise again in the coming weeks and months and years before 2027. But as long as we are looking for salvation in fellows with KANU mentality, I don't think we're getting anywhere.
You know, there's the idea, there's something that has been said on very many occasions, that the president is a micromanager. I've often wondered, let's take the view that he is, and that he wants to have the last say on anybody. You happen to be a minister, you happen to be a PS, you know the sort of president you have. When the president makes a statement about some function of government, is it not incumbent upon the civil servant or the minister, whoever it is, because that is their docket, to take the step of explaining it further? Who knows more details about that particular minister? Is it you or the president? Who knows more details about what happens every day? Is it the PS or the president?
It should be the person directly in charge, and that is not the president.
Yes, it is
should
not.
be the CS and the PS.
Yes.
And they have various technical people also in their
And usually very competent people, not just technical, very competent.
The president should be about setting the basic, you may call it the basic agenda, the basic principles of his government. But in terms of coming out with the fine print and the implementation, that it really should cascade down the system.
Right.
And it does not have to come from State House.
How do you know
Yeah.
if what is coming out to the people is true?
Yes.
How do you know?
How do you fact check?
How do you
Everybody's saying something.
how do you balance it against what the experience is? For example, I think we've seen a position whereby the president, as in the position of the president, comes out and there's an expectation that when he says something, people are going to say, well, since the president has said it, that must be the case. Put that vis-a-vis a situation whereby you go to hospital and your bills are not paid in terms of how he said it would, right? Which do you then say we are going to take on as, subservient citizens who say, well, the president has spoken, so there it must be the truth. It's been, propaganda has been spread. Do you insist on a position whereby you see for sure this thing is not working, guys, and that's what we must stick to? Or do you say, well, the president said it's going to get better, and so let's hold on to that hope?
If you want to be charitable, we can say that the president has said this, let's give him time, blah, blah, blah. But if that does not change the reality on the ground or does not reflect reality on the ground, we can say it. I think our newspapers, our media houses have networks across the country. And the media becomes the you might call the voice of the voiceless.
Yes.
It is giving a platform for those people who have issues to speak out. And the hope is that those in governance will listen and hear and take the necessary action. The thing is that they don't hear and they prefer not to hear.
No, there's the media, then there is the social media.
All part of the media.
All of it.
Yeah.
It's all media.
And I'm coming to something with
Yeah.
that. Now, the mainstream media would fact check. We have that particular connection on the ground, etc. But did you realize that the mainstream media is, how do I call this, regulated? We have our ethics, conduct booklet with the Media Council. You do not do that with YouTubers. You do not do that with bloggers. You don't do that with influencers. When they have to push a certain narrative, they just do it.
Social media has become a very, very, very big source of news and information. Even in many cases, if it comes to in pure numbers, overtaking mainstream media. But mainstream media is still relied on for validation. You can see a lot of stuff on social media, but you might hold back until first you check.
What is mainstream media saying about this?
Yeah. Of course, a lot of people will take everything they read there with as gospel truth. But those who want to be a bit more careful will also want to see what is the mainstream media saying. Is it the truth? Because once it is the mainstream media, that is validation.
Not when you paint a mainstream media as biased.
You see, who is painting the mainstream media as biased?
Exactly.
Who is saying they're biased?
It is those who don't want to be told of certain basic truths.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see, you must understand that if you're talking about the media in Kenya and you talk about it being biased, then perhaps somebody ought to just take a little tour and look at media in so-called developed countries. Those ones have clear biases. You even know.
Everybody knows
You
who's
know that this particular media house has this leaning. This one has this leaning. This TV station, yes.
And they make it clear.
Yes.
Yes.
You know, they have their ideological positions. They don't hide all their party positions.
Yes, there's clarity. What we do here in the attempt to actually make things as impartial as possible is not easy. Because like with media elsewhere, there are always other people trying to influence that particular process. It's not as though it's a smooth ride where once you're on it, it's just going to continue moving. No. There are hiccups, there are bumps, there are potholes. And that is the constant journey that the media, actually even the world over, has to traverse. But back to what it is that one ought to see or expect. I actually do not buy this lazy explanation that because you have a loquacious president and one who enjoys hearing his opinion and speaking, that is an excuse for people who've been appointed to do other to perform certain functions, that is now the excuse for not. No, that I do not buy.
Macharia,
Yeah.
media often, and for the longest time, and maybe that has changed in the world of new media, which social media falls into, has been the fourth estate and still continues to be so, whereby it would look as though it was the fact-checking arm of government, and to shed light on the things that are happening in the nation. Is it still the case? And we know that there are many arms of government that use media, in some cases mainstream media, to push a particular agenda. And that's where we had the whole thing of brown envelope journalism coming through. That's where that was birthed from. In today's day, and in this time where, unfortunately, if you look across the headlines, you will not be hard-pressed to find something that's not working, right? Something that has been undone. And this is media highlighting some of these things. When there's a moral push for certain things, would you say that media still has a responsibility to hold hard and fast to that position, whereby you take on the persona of the fourth estate and you highlight things, whatever they may be, good, bad, wrong, right?
Media is the only business in Kenya that is expressly protected by the Constitution. And I think that is a recognition of media's role as the fourth estate, the independent institution which holds government to account. What you might call the watchdog, plays a watchdog role, and also provides a voice for those who need a voice. In our African context, there is also something very unique about Kenya, in that Kenya is one of the few countries that does not have a dominant state-owned media. There is no government newspaper. Most other African countries, you will find the biggest newspaper is owned by the government. You will find that the radio station with the biggest audience and reach, and TV also, is owned by the government. Kenya, there is no government presence, significant government presence in the media. Even KBC, which has theoretically the widest reach, when it comes to people tuning in, I don't think they get 2% of the audiences.
The audience share.
So, as media, independent media, there is a very, very big responsibility thrust on us. Survey after survey has shown over the years that the media is the most trusted institution in Kenya, more than government, more than the judiciary, more than the police, more even than the churches. But there has been a slide over the last few years. Of course, the emergence of social media has completely upset the apple cart. But also there has been emergence of brown envelope journalism.
Yes.
That I think we acknowledge is a major issue now. I used to see that as the norm when I visit Tanzania, Congo, and a few other places. In Kenya, it was something very quiet. Today, it is a big problem.
It's been mainstreamed.
It has been mainstreamed.
Yes.
And the growth of many small media outlets, particularly radio stations, without any, you may call it a business plan. It leaves a lot of reporters to fend for themselves, so to speak. So which means you attend a press conference, you expect transport or lunch. But even with some of the mainstream media houses, things are not looking very good because some are unable to pay their salaries. So there are big issues. I worked at Nation when it was declaring profits of
How many
2
billions?
billion. The last time I checked, they were in loss-making
Mood.
territory. And we don't know how far down they will go. There are many others which are mainstream, which are all are struggling. So there are big issues there. Too often we say, if the government paid our debts, everything will be okay. That is not the problem. The problem is that the media environment has changed. Audience tastes have changed. Advertisers have shifted their revenues elsewhere. Newspaper sales are collapsing. So we have been unable to work out new business models to sustain us. As simple as that.
We haven't been able to keep up with the times.
We've not been able to keep up with the times.
By choice or forced into it?
You see, we were stuck in newspapers and radio and TV. Then came the whole issue of digital journalism. We tried to go into what you might call converged journalism. But we have not learned how to monetize those platforms. As simple as that.
Okay.
And then all too often, and that is one of the things I found when I followed, is that some of these, what you might, shifts that we are trying to do are not driven from the newsroom. They're driven by accountants. And an accountant says everything as a chance to save money. Therefore, get a converged newsroom, cut your head count. We're forgetting that you actually need more people, not less, to operate a 24-hour news cycle, which is being updated, not even every hour, every minute.
I hear you. But even as those things are happening, I mean, there is the shift in the media space. Those things happening on the global scale, not just here in
It's
Kenya.
global. It is not
It's
just
a global
Kenya,
phenomenon, and not. I mean, and a reality. But if we steer things back to here, I think there's the trepidation that's met by many a journalist today or many a newsroom where you say, well, if I say this or I speak this particular truth, the possibility of the government of the day coming for me would be an issue. Now, how do you weather that storm and say, you know what, regardless of the situation, regardless of the threat there is overhead, regardless of what somebody might say about you and told you, what have they not called media? You know, give it...
Very media.
Exactly. So many things that have been said.
Yes.
The truth of the matter is that there are certain things in the nation that are not happening in the manner in which they ought to. That there are certain things that are happening in a manner in which they should not be. How do you weather that storm and keep sharing information with Kenyans regardless of what the situation might be? Because these are truths that we see every day. The truth of the matter, for example, is that the education that should be afforded children today is not being afforded to them in the manner in which it ought to be. You made a budget, 64 billion shillings over 5 years, you've not finished. You have roads which have been, you don't even have to go very far, just behind here, Enterprise Road. Somebody went and finished university and come back, Enterprise Road is not finished. We have issues whereby you have a health system, 104 billion shillings. If these things come out into the open by one who is appointed by government as the Auditor General, for example, and comes out and says, guys, there's something here that's wrong, and goes back to Parliament and says, you know what, you guys are the ones who should tell us what's going on, hadn't we a duty to share that information with Kenyans, regardless of what the backlash from those who protect the systems would be?
And we're still sharing that information every single day. Look at the newsstands. Watch our TV stations.
Yes.
How are people getting... look at the blanket coverage on Shah and Chief. And so many other things. I think our newspapers, our TV stations are constantly pointing out failures and giving a platform for those who have an issue to raise. So even with all the problems the media is having, I think it is still keeping to its core mandate. It is still keeping to its core mandate. Yes, there have been pressures. Government will always put pressure on us. Big corporations who are also the big advertisers,
Yes.
will always exert some pressure because they don't want negative coverage. And but I think by and large, our media is doing a wonderful job, despite all the constraints, despite the financial pressures. I think it is still keeping the fires burning.
You know, there's this argument.
And I think it is still the most aggressive and the most professional media in the whole of Africa.
Now, I, as a young journalist, perhaps if I could just tap on your wisdom, often, more often than not, we've been criticized, of splashing what people term negative news. Some even saying they don't want to indulge anymore. But this is exactly why it's happening. And I'm curious to understand. It is our job to report what is happening in the society, Kio Chajami. Now, there are good things that happen, which we equally report. But there is this belief that media will always splash the more negative headlines than the positive. But is that really the case?
Let me put it this way. When the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, that will never be news. That will never be news. It did what it always does, what it is expected to do. News will be when the sun rises in the west.
Right. Yes.
Or fails to rise at all.
Yes.
The same thing with a cabinet secretary or a president. If he simply does his job competently and efficiently, that will not be news. It is what he is paid to do. It is what he expected to do.